Welcome to the Best Music Podcast, where we see behind the curtain and discover the hidden habits and success secrets of noteworthy music makers so you, the listener or viewer, can speed up your journey to your dream music goals by taking what you need from their wins and lessons learned along your way. I am your host, Dan Spencer, and this week's featured guest is Dr. Fish.
Every Monday night I'd play a club on the other side of town. One night stop for focus, headed up and headed down. It was also home to a few like me, stranded in between.
Dr. Fish's Renaissance record debut reveals a proud musical throwback, a guitar-wielding, storytelling, folk rock singer-songwriter. No fake retro act, he's one of the last surviving purveyors of a style of music made famous by Jim Croce, Harry Chapin, Cat Stevens, James Taylor, Paul Simon, and Gordon Lightfoot. The road to Dr. Fish's debut has been a long and winding one. As he sings in his Tuesday morning, you know that I'm still standing, just not where I thought I'd be. He grew up playing saxophone in Tucson, Arizona, and pursued jazz through college. As a saxophonist, he backed legends like Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, and Cher. Somewhere along the way, the good doctor picked up a guitar and began writing and singing songs. His journey also found him earning a Ph.D. in ethnomusicology and living in Japan for some years. From there, he founded a thriving program of study for students of popular music at a small college in North Carolina. The good doctor's emergence as a solo performer is a beautiful fluke that makes him one of the oldest artists with a debut release. The legendary David Kirschenbaum, who's produced Tracy Chapman, Tori Amos, Joe Jackson, produced The Last Troubadour. The album features bassist Leland Sklar, who has played with literally everyone, including James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Carole King, Toto, the list goes on. Drummer Denny Fongheiser, who's played with Heart, Counting Crows, and Sean Calvin, and top studio musicians from around the world. We encourage you and invite you to check out more, find the new album, and learn more about Dr. Fish at dr.fish. Yes, you heard that right. DOCTOR.FISH. Dr. Fish, thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with me today.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much, Dan.
Dr. Fish, real quick, because I know some people's ears just got perked up when I read that bio, would you mind giving everyone the cliff notes on what an ethnomusicologist does?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure thing, Dan. It is one of two things, or sometimes both. It's either the study of musics beyond the Western world, beyond Europe and America, or that are not part of the classical tradition. So ethnomusicology, some ethnomusicologists study blues, things like that, Appalachian music, but it's also then the study of the cultural aspects of music, right? Which tend to traditional musicologists tend to sort of gloss over those. They weren't so much interested in them, but you know, it's what gives music meaning, right? All those cultural things go along with it. So.
Something that strikes me listening to your album is it makes me think of the Taj Mahal, in the sense that men will build, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, build these lasting testaments to their love for their significant others. Would you care to comment a little bit on the inspiration of writing from a place of love and writing from a place of desire and how that inspires you?
Sure, and that's very perceptive, Dan. That's a great question. I got to start by saying I'm a repeat offender with that. That there's undying love expressed for a couple of different women on the album. That were in different phases of my life. Some of them were true, real to life women. Arizona Skies, the first song on the album. It's kind of a triptych of lots of places I've been. But it's also about my high school sweetheart, right? The first big love of my life that, it fell apart and it just wasted me So, it took many years to find something better, I guess you'd say, right? So, and then there's one called Anastasia. Now, that's not about a single woman per se. It's the most romantic song on the album, and it's a bit of a conglomerate of a number of women maybe I knew, and also maybe just some romanticizing and fantasizing as well. Certainly the one that is very true to life is And So This Is Love, which I wrote about my wife. Right. So, So that's, if you want to know. So this, Dan, it sounds like your podcast is somewhat for musicians. Is that correct? Or do you get a lot of musicians that listen? Okay.
Yeah, for those especially who are on their journey to become a better, which we all are, always, but people who are at the beginnings or the middle of their journey to get to where they want to in music.
There you go. I love that. Okay. So that said, I may talk a little bit more inside baseball about some of these songs than I might otherwise. I taught songwriting for many years at the college where I created this popular music program, right? And, one of the things with young songwriters is to get them past perfect rhymes. The love, glove, dove sort of lines. In large part because they're cliched, right? And also they can be sing-songish, right? And for some sorts of music, that's great, being sing-songish, right? But for others, if you're trying to cop a more sophisticated sort of, feeling, then often you want to look beyond perfect rhymes to what are called imperfect rhymes, which is kind of ironic because they're often more perfect than the perfect rhymes, right? Okay, so love is the word that all of the perfect rhymes are cliches. Right? Like I just said, love, dove, glove, maybe shove isn't, but, after post-punk, maybe that's also a cliche. Who knows? But, all right, so that song was a challenge to me, which I would give to my students as well. I said, all right, I'm going to write a song with love as in the prime rhyming spot for the song. Right? And I'm going to write an entire song rhyming love. Each verse is going to be different rhyme, and each one is going to be an imperfect rhyme. Right? So that's where you get, and so this is love, and now I know it's enough. Right? So I was doing a couple of different things with that. I was trying to write something very sincere, expression to my wife, but also just giving myself a songwriting challenge.
Could you speak a little bit about what you feel and I forget the exact words you just used, but the primary rhyming place would be? I find that fascinating. I'm not familiar with that concept, so please.
Yeah, well, for songwriters out there, there was a wonderful. I think he's retired now, but there was a wonderful songwriting professor at Berklee School of Music, right? And I'm blanking on his name at the moment. But he has a couple of great books and workbooks, and one of his is just that, getting beyond perfect rhymes. and also taking advantage of rhyme spots in songs, right? That the more strategic you are about where you rhyme and how you rhyme, the stronger you make the song, the more impactful you can make it, right? And, rhymes are kind of hot spots, and that's his terminology, hot spots in songs, because they do a couple of things. They bring together ideas, they bring together sounds, and they're often at a place in a song where there's a rest after it, right? It's sort of like at the end of a verse or the end of at least a phrase, right? So it gives you a little time to think about it, right? And also the other power of rhyming is that it's like that old saying about waiting for the other shoe to fall. You set up the rhyme, and now you've got the listener anticipating what's he going to rhyme with that word, right? So it's the strategic use of rhymes, is so important, I think, in lyric writing.
Okay, could you provide one tactical example of where these pressure points, these points of high leverage, might be? For sure, we could think, if we're talking about, for example, a rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, that final A would be a high impact point, correct? High leverage?
Yeah, it would be, especially, maybe not the first time. Boy, we're really getting into inside baseball now.
Yeah.
But once it's established in the listener's mind that the form is A, B, B, A, then the second time around, they know it's going to be A, B, because they don't know the first time. It could go A, B, B, C, right? Or it could go A, B, 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 right? A, B, 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 whatever that is, right? But after you've established it the first time, then that's really powerful, because now, subconsciously, and most of this is happening on a subconscious level for listeners, right? It's tension and release, right? When you open it up for there to be a rhyme, you create tension, and with the fulfillment of that rhyme, you're creating release, right?
Sure. Let's take a step back, and if you wouldn't mind, dear Dr. Fish, giving just a brief cliff notes of what a perfect rhyme is in terms of definition, and then also just cliff notes of what an imperfect rhyme would be in terms of the families, just so people can understand how the fundamentals of that works. Sure
thing. And this is off the top of my head, so hopefully I'll come up with some good examples. But and again, we're getting really. I love talking about this stuff, but it's getting really inside stuff here, right? Okay, so love. All right, a rhyme is made up of. It's a relationship between the sounds of syllables, and typical rhyme is that what's called a masculine rhyme. Boy, here we go. The rhyme is on the last syllable. Let's go back to love. So the of is the same between all of the words, right? The sound before that syllable that you rhymed is different. So that's where you got gl of, d of, right? Now, with imperfect rhymes, they typically have a phonetic relationship with what would have been the perfect rhyme. Like dove, that's called a voiced fricative.
Ooh, look out, people. We're going deep today.
Because, can you stand this?
Yeah, do it.
You got the bandwidth for this?
Oh, we are rocking. This is awesome.
All right, okay. It's called a voiced fricative because there's friction of air going through your mouth, and you're using your vocal cords. Th is a voiced fricative. Th is an unvoiced fricative. You make it the same way, so same, the structure with your mouth. One, you just, engage the vocal cord. The other, you don't. All right. So love is the v of love is a voiced fricative. I just said that f is an unvoiced fricative. So, but they're related phonetically, right? So that's why substituting a word like enough works very well as a substitute for another v word. What I said from my song. And so this is love, and now I know it's enough. Right? Our ears still have this sense it rhymes in some sort of way, but it's a more subtle rhyme. And honestly, in like a love song, in a ballad, that softer sort of rhyme is often more conducive. Right?
So would it be fair to summarize and say that a perfect rhyme has both a vowel sound and a consonant sound match, whereas the imperfect rhyme will have the vowel sound match, but then you can pick from families of different consonant sounds at the end?
Almost.
Okay.
For it that easy. Because there are some words, to, do, grew, there isn't a vowel at the end, or there isn't a consonant.
True. Good point. Yes.
Right?
Indeed.
And sometimes you could have a word that's a one-syllable word that it just starts with, one. Right? Doesn't start with it. So it gets kind of.
It does, doesn't it? Cool. Well, we could say that for most words that have both a consonant and vowel, that would be true. That's right. So 80-20. 80-20.
Basically speaking.
We got Prado on our shoulder telling us we've got that okay. So, excellent. So we talked about rhyming. That's super cool. One thing that I found very striking about your album was not just the vocal performance, which I would love to talk with you about, but also the arrangement, the mixing, and the mastering, and the musicianship from everyone on the album. I mean, stellar stuff, like tight, stellar stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really. So can you talk about the process of selecting people that you are going to work with to bring into a project with you that you're going to trust with your baby to do their instrument better than you could ever imagine or hope, or perhaps just do it exactly as you envisioned?
Well, Dan, these are such wonderful questions, sincerely, man. We may be here all day chatting about this, right? So may I talk about my voice first, so we just don't forget it. We don't forget it.
Yeah, fire away. And sorry if I keep bopping up and down. For some reason, the piston on this chair just decided to go, and so I'm like slowly sinking down as you're talking. And so forgive me as I bump up and down. Cool.
So my voice. So I've been around higher education, music schools all my life. So I've always been adjacent to vocalists and vocal teachers, and one of my best buddies was an opera coach of high-level opera singers, and somehow, I never studied singing. I never studied singing, and I like to say some singers are self-taught. I'm just self. Right, I think naturally I kind of have a resonant speaking voice, and my singing is kind of more an extension of that than anything, right? And it's also I don't think there are many singers who sound like me, right, as well, right? And so I was very self-conscious about that for my whole life, right? That, I just since I was so different, was it good, different bad? I think often you don't have the personal perspective on yourself as an artist with that sort of thing. All right. So, and this kind of spills over a little bit into your second question. So, I made a demo in the 1990s that went nowhere.
Well, Dr. Fish, if you don't mind, if I could pause you there for one moment, just to clarify for listeners who might perhaps think that they themselves should go and not study voice and they will get a result similar to yours. You have years of musical study on saxophone, guitar. You went to college for music. Like you say, you've been around singers. So it's like, it's not someone starting with zero experience going in and singing. It's like you've been around this your whole life.
Yeah, Dan, very well said. Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. I have, through osmosis, I've certainly picked up things, right?
Indeed.
But there's another specific part of that there's kind of there's a quirky thing that I do singing that I didn't realize until a year or so ago, or while I was making this album. So I started as a saxophonist, right? You mentioned in the bio. Well, with a saxophone, the whole deal is you create this kind of this pressure, right? Just this column of. It's like an internal CPAP machine or something or other, right? So and you hold that throughout the entire phrase, and then only when you let go of the final note do you let go of the air. So if you listen really closely, I don't know why anybody would want, but if you listen really closely to some of my phrases on the album, you hear that at the end of my phrases.
Oh, I heard it. Yeah, it was very interesting.
And I was very subconscious about that. And David Kirshner, because David Kirshner, he could have cut those out. And I say, David. He said, no. That's part of your musical personality, right? So no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure I brought a lot of things that I know I did. I brought a lot of the things from playing saxophone to singing. Right, and phrasing, musical phrasing, and all sorts of other things. I phrase like an instrumentalist as well, my singing.
Yes, and it is almost saxophone-ish in its consistency of drive and output.
Yep, and that's how I played saxophone. I'm mainly tenor saxophone player. And that was kind of my way with saxophone as well, right? So you're not going to find a lot of Beyonce melismas at the end of phrases. You're going to find none of those with me.
Right, but you don't need it because that's who you are, and you don't need to sound like the most fancy. Like the most fancy person is not who everyone needs to go copy. You need to copy yourself, and you need to find your voice, your sound, and be who you are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, and I think it fits my music as well. That sort of folk rock, style it was meant to be unadorned, right? It was meant to be just any old person singing his songs, right? So, but at any rate, to finish up this part of the story, so. I made this demo in the 1990s. It went nowhere. It was, underwritten by a record label, but ultimately they decided my style was too old-fashioned at that point. And you got to remember, this is like the Backstreet Boys era, and so it was, from that perspective, right? So it's only a fluke that a couple of years ago that I played for John Edwards, the owner, the founder of Renaissance Records, my album, right? Or some of the songs. Or I played one song, actually. Because that song wound up having some political significance now, right? It was just sort of dystopian view of a future America, which was seeming like very much like present dystopian America, or something like that, right? So John said, "Well, do you have more of these songs?" I said, "Yeah, I got like 8 more." So he said, "Well, let's put it out as a vinyl EP, right?" And I said, "Great." And then I said, "Well, but John, I have a couple more. How about we make it a full album? Can I throw in a few newer songs?" And he said, "Fine." So I recorded those in the studio at my college, right? And I sent it out for just to mix down. So I had very little pretenses about the album and so forth. It got into the hands of David Kirschenbaum, and you mentioned his bio earlier, right? And David reached out to me, and which was kind of like, sitting at home watching football and you get a call from a supermodel for a date. And I was just sort of, who? Me? Really? Bill, is that you? Right? Is this a prank? Right? So, but the one, and this goes back to the voice, the voice aspect of it. David began by saying, I made my career by working with singular voices. And that's everybody from Cat Stevens to Karen Carpenter to Sting, as you said, Amos, and you name it, Tori Amos. And he said, I love your voice. Oh, I love what you're doing, the vibe of the music, but I really love your voice. That's all it took, man. That's all my doubt about my voice. All my lifelong doubt melted in that one interaction, right? David Kirschenbaum thinks I sing well, right? So I must sing well, right? So anyway, that's me concerning my voice. So I've only recently come to love my voice, I guess is the bottom line of that story.
So how does it get into David's hands? You said it fell into David's hands. How did it get to David's hands?
I don't know. Somebody that he knew who was an engineer, right? I sent it around to a number of people. I never asked him, honestly. That'd be a great question to ask him. Shared it with him. And he said, I hope you don't mind me reaching out to you. Well, yeah, no. Thanks for doing so, yeah. So, and he was just a joy to work with, and we've become friends. And, I guess we mentioned, I guess this was before we started the podcast, I've been fortunate to know like 3 different producers from what I consider that golden age of producers, 1970s, right? One is David Kirschenbaum, still very active. Ken Calais, who is the producer for Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, right? Another, Bill Simzik, who was a producer for the Eagles, right? And I mentioned to Ken, I guess it was one time, I said, you guys are such great listeners. I mean, not only to the music, to the people. And he said, well, yeah, that's kind of our job, right? And it's interesting because like Bill Simzik, he started out not as a musician, but he was a sonar operator on a submarine. So that's how he learned to get such big ears, right? So anyway, David was a joy to work with.
So you get David on board. What happens next?
He brings the others for the most part. You can imagine he has just an incredible contact list of musicians that he's worked with. I could never on my own get a Leland Sklar to play bass on my album, but David can, right? Same with Denny Fongheiser. Now, I did find some of the musicians myself. And there's actually this wonderful online Fiverr for musicians, if you will, called Sound Better.
Oh, we love Sound Better. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're just great musicians from all over the world, right? So the cellist, I'm blanking on his name, but he's worked with Regina Spektor and just all sorts of great artists, right? And and with today's technology, many of those guys are set up at home that you send them the Pro Tools file, or at least a mix down of the song as it is at that point. Either have them come up with a part. Well, it could work a couple of ways. Certainly with the cellist, that was that way. I would write the cello parts and send them, to him. He'd, within a day, give me like maybe 3 different takes that I could choose from. And same thing with horns. I worked with a great horn group in Atlanta. Same way, virtually. And the other way, of course, is that we would have 3-way sessions where David would be in his studio in the Hollywood Hills. I think Lee lives in Pasadena, something like that. Lee would be, on Zoom. And then I would be here in North Carolina. And there's another, and I'm blanking on the name of this plugin. There's a plugin where it's not real time, but that you can listen in on each other's sessions. You know what I'm talking
all the
about?
time. Is it Audio Movers?
Yeah, Audio Movers. Right. So a lot of the album was done with Audio Movers. Yeah. Right. So big fan of modern technology.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So once you have everything tracked, everything's in place, can you talk a little? This is turning into a masterclass of how to produce an album, so I'm just going to flow with it. So once you go in for mixing and mastering and all that, can you talk about the mixing process, what role you played in it, how that all went down?
Yeah. I played, by design, my design, absolutely no role in the mixdown. Now, I did different aspects of the mix. For example, I was in charge of rhythmic alignment, of taking each of the final takes, the comp of the final comps of each of the tracks, and rhythmically aligning with them with each other, right? That's one of the sort of the dirty little secrets about, modern music, that so much of it, it's even Leland Sklar's parts, even Denny Fongheiser's parts, where 20 years ago they wouldn't have been rhythmically aligned. They are now, right? And I got to the point, I became such a snob, Dan, I would go be in the grocery store with my wife, and, oh, that song's not rhythmically aligned. Oh, that one is, right? It's kind of like auto-tune for rhythm, right? So that was one of my jobs in helping out with it, right? Now, speaking of auto-tune, that was something that we sent out to one of the secret professionals in the industry, that's their job, right? To tune your vocals. And, you tell them. Well, for example, one of the earliest decisions we made was, well, this is not a pop album, so we don't want it perfectly in tune. Right? We want there to be, some natural, give and take of intonation. So that went out to another person. But beyond that, it was all David. And like I said, that was by my design. I would tell David all the time, David, my songs, my singing, but your album. Right?
So, go ahead, sorry.
When you are so fortunate to work with a producer of his. He's not the Pope, right? He's not infallible, and he was certainly open to occasional suggestions. But when you're in the hands of such a experienced, trusted producer, man, why would I get in the middle of that, right? So,
a quick breakdown. Comping. So comping is when you take multiple recordings and you can stitch them together. You take little pieces and you can take the best parts of each one and sort of glue them all together. Yep. Another way of doing it is called quantization, when you quantize things and you could actually lock everything down. So within the comp quantize world, I guess my question for you is, how rhythmically perfect did you want things to be? Because at a certain point, things can be almost too perfect, where it becomes robotic. And at a certain point, things will sound messy if there is no cohesion. And that could be down to the players, right? Which, obviously, you're working with world-class people. It's not going to get messy.
Yeah. Right.
But can you talk a little bit about your personal continuum or your personal goal that you had in terms of what you were aiming for in terms of the rhythmic outcome of this editing process?
Yeah, very astute question. Very astute question. You mentioned before we started rolling Michael Jackson, and that was before quantization, but that's very tight rhythmically, his recordings, right? Almost to the limit of human ability to be tight. On the other hand, you had some wonderful old jazz recordings, like Art Blakey's groups and so forth, that were so loose and wonderful. If you had tightened those up, it would have lost so much of their mojo, right? So it's really not so much. It isn't by the. At least the way we did it, I was doing it. It's not so much by the track, it's by the instrument within the track, right? For example, kick drum, snare, rhythmically aligning those, quantizing them, tight is worked well. And you can also do it so, let's say the beats are on, but everything between that and the next beat has some fluctuation, right? So the thing that wasn't, also my rhythmic guitar was quantized quite a bit. Could mean because I suck as a guitarist. Compared to those other musicians, Dan.
I get it. You're playing with Leland Sklar. Like, at the
that's
you're
right,
like,
that's right.
What's he going to do?
That's right. But my vocals weren't. There was, but that's very common. Like, if you listen to Frank Sinatra, man, he's all over the place with the beat, and that's what made, to a certain extent, his singing so wonderful, that he was behind the beat, so much. And that kind of flummoxed David a little bit, because that's one place where I brought my jazz background is. If you listen to my lyrics, they're quite syncopated, right? And he would think, no, that's not right. And I said, no, you just need to listen to it to where you get. So now, understand, he's listening just to the, just the what do we call it? The track that just the guitar and voice that I send him, right? And so, in that context, but I'd say, trust me, David. And when you get the other musicians who understand that that's what's going on, then it would bring it to life, right? So, but for the most part, my voice wasn't quantized at all. Oh, but may I add one more thing?
Please.
The background voices, those poor guys. they had to be quantized to my syncopated thinking.
Yeah.
And do you know there's another wonderful, dirty little secret? There's a plug-in for Pro Tools and Logic that you can tell it which of the tracks is the master, let's say vocals, and it will perfectly align all of the others to that. Oh, well, you can choose. Yeah. So those were heavily quantized, not necessarily to the metronome, but to my singing.
Indeed, because I can recall a moment, I forget what song it was and I forget what was happening, but there was a female voice an octave above your own.
Yeah.
And it was like 90% right with you, and sometimes right at the ends of phrases there was a little bit of play, which is delightful. And again, like we were talking about, there's no right or wrong answer here. It comes down to artistic intention, artistic desire. What sound, what feeling do you want? Some people are like, no auto-tune, no quantization, it's all nonsense, don't use it. And some people are like, only auto-tune, only quantization, everything else is nonsense. It's like, no, it's art. Make the art the way you want to make it.
Yeah, no, you're right. Another, you said intention, and another good word is choice.
Yeah, artistic choice, exactly.
And, and I think the song you're talking about is A Man and a Woman, maybe, or Hang the Moon. Both of those have a single...
Hang the Moon, it was. Beautiful song, by the way. I'm getting goosebumps. Just the premise of that song was delightful. What an incredible story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted it to sound like it was a second person singing with me.
Yeah, right.
So, therefore, I didn't want it to be completely locked up, right? On another song, like, I don't know, I'm Not Done Yet, or whatever, that's very rhythmic, then you do want it to... Except the last chorus of that, which is a sing-along, and then I intentionally made it unquantized, so it sounded like a bunch of people, like, extemporaneously singing along, right? So.
And just to bring that home, if I may respectfully add that if you were to perfectly quantize two voices an octave apart from each other, they would almost start hiding behind each other, and you'd not be able to really hear the difference between the two. When you match things up too closely, they start to lose the life of it starts to go away, and it's a different sound. And when I say the life that goes away, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it doesn't sound like two people anymore. It sounds like one person. There's a little extra something going on. That's very good. Gregorian chant. Yeah.
Which is often either unison or in octaves, right? They do try to lock them up as much as possible, and that helps give it that kind of hollow sound, which they want in that case, right?
Wow. Okay, so we've got to mixing. Tell us about the mastering. Bring us home, Dr. Fish.
Yeah. So, like I said, I worked on an album in the 1990s, and it's so long ago, I don't remember, the mastering phase of that. But I remember working with David, song by song. We'd finish one song, go on to the next, and I'd listen back to them, like back to back, and they sounded so different from one another. Like they weren't part of the same whole. And and when I would, just sort of gingerly bring that up, David, should I be, he would tell me, don't worry about it. That gets taken care of in the mastering. Right? And so I said, oh, okay. Right. So my voice was always higher when
I'm catching the pattern here.
After a while, I loosened up and became more relaxed with them. But all right. So because of David, we were able to send it to Grumman, which is, the most legendary mastering house in the world. They've been around since the 1950s. They claim that, and I have no reason to not believe them, that 20% of all, songs that are on the Hot 100, whatever it is, you name the chart, they master them. It got sent off. I forget the person's name who did them. World of difference. I mean, often mastering, and this is part of it, they just maximize the volume of it. And that's just a modern reality because of, the compression wars that took place, maybe a generation ago now. But there's so much more to it to bring out the best qualities of a single song in a way that even a producer can't do. And then to get the songs to work together, right? So I could not have been happier with that, right? We're hopeful that this album's going to go to vinyl, and Grumman still has the vinyl mastering, so they will actually master it to a vinyl mother or whatever that would be, which is, I'm not sure exactly why that sounds so much better, but I'm going to believe them, right? So.
Incredible. I would like to just, if I may, respectfully add 2 points of value, which is a mastering house is going to be basically a company where there's usually more than one person who does mastering, this process. And then compression wars was a time when people were figuring out how loud you could get music to play out of radios, stereos, speakers. And from that, we now have modern standards where everyone tries to be at a certain level of loudness to be with everyone else, and indeed streaming platforms like YouTube Music, Spotify, etc. will actually normalize the levels and loudness of the music to reach a homogeneous level, so you don't go through one song and, oh my gosh, it startles you because it's so much louder than the rest.
And it's interesting, Dan. Dynamics is one of the things I have to teach my students. I grew up at a time where dynamics were just a natural third dimension of music, right? Now, because of the compression wars, young musicians who haven't played with, more mature musicians who do understand dynamics, they have no concept of it, really, right? So I used to play in big bands that would go from, nothing to just huff and puff and blow the wall down. I'm old enough, man, that I heard Count Basie Band live, right? In a high school gym, no less. And it was exactly that. It would go from that, from Basie tinkling on the piano, just like that, to just being this, right? And it really is it's the third dimension of music, but that we've largely lost. Right, so.
Well, experience music in 3 dimensions with the new album, The Last Troubadour. Check it out and find out more at Dr.Fish. Dr. Fish, thank you so very much for being so generous with your time, expertise, everything, sharing the entire process of what it takes to create an album with us today, talking and sharing everything. So thank you so very much for your time, and you're welcome back anytime, Dr. Fish.
Oh, Dan, let's, one of the things you might want to have me back for, I pride myself on being the Forrest Gump of music.
Okay.
I have rubbed shoulders, sometimes inadvertently, with a number of artists down through the years. I'll regale you with my story about how I backed into Stevie Wonder one time. And his reaction, which was just priceless. But Dan, this has been a pleasure, man. It's been a joy talking about music as a musician to other musicians. It's been a real joy.
Thank you, Dr. Fish.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Dan.